It was a quiet afternoon when billionaire businessman Thomas Devereaux decided to pull off the most shocking move of his life. A man who had everything, wealth, power, and influence, was suddenly set on one thing: revenge. His ex-wife, Olivia, had left him years ago, taking with her not just a piece of his heart, but also a chunk of his ego. She had walked away with half of everything he owned, leaving him with a bruised pride and a bitter taste in his mouth. And so, Thomas concocted a plan to hurt her, to make her feel the sting of his loss in a way that would shake her world. His idea was simple: marry someone beneath her, someone who would make her question everything she thought she knew about his life. He'd been toying with the idea for months. But one afternoon, as he sipped his scotch alone in his office, the idea struck him like a bolt of lightning. He would marry someone unexpected, someone that would send shockwaves through Olivia's carefully constructed life. A maid, but not just any maid, someone from a completely different world. Someone who would make Olivia squirm, stir up all those old feelings of superiority and control. And that's exactly what he did. Her name was Emily, a woman with no connections, no wealth, and no intention of ever becoming the center of some millionaire's revenge plot. Emily had worked as a maid in one of Thomas's many luxury estates. She was kind, humble, and had lived a simple life, working to make ends meet while taking care of the house in quiet anonymity. She wasn't looking for drama, fame, or fortune. But when Thomas approached her with an offer that seemed almost too strange to believe, her entire world would be turned upside down. "Marry me," he had said, his voice cold and calculated. "I'll make sure you never have to work again." At first, Emily thought it was some sort of sick joke. But when the details were laid out, she understood. Thomas didn't want her for love, not even for company. He wanted her for a purpose, a tool in his twisted game of vengeance against his ex-wife. Emily was a pawn in a rich man's power play, and for some reason, she agreed to it. But what Thomas didn't know was that Emily wasn't the meek, silent woman he had assumed. No, there was more to her than met the eye. She wasn't about to let herself be dragged into a game where she had no say, and as she became more involved in his world, she began to see cracks in Thomas's carefully built empire of arrogance and entitlement. Behind the walls of his mansion and the luxury cars, Thomas was a man haunted by his past, a man trying desperately to hold on to his wealth and power, but losing sight of what truly mattered in life. It wasn't long before the media caught wind of the strange union. Rumors began to swirl. Why would a billionaire marry a maid? People asked. The world was eager to know what Thomas was up to, and Olivia, of course, was watching from the sidelines, trying to make sense of what was happening. She had her suspicions, but she wasn't prepared for the truth that would unfold before her. And then came the twist no one saw coming. As the wedding day approached, Olivia couldn't help but attend. She was determined to watch Thomas's latest move unfold, convinced that it would be nothing more than a pathetic attempt to get back at her. But as she sat there, dressed in her elegant attire, she noticed something strange. Emily wasn't the woman she had imagined, a woman who would cower under Thomas's control. Instead, she stood tall, poised, and strong, with a sense of dignity that no amount of money could buy. It was as if she knew something no one else did. The guests were confused. The press was on edge. What was happening here? Why was Emily so calm, so collected in the face of everything? And why, despite all of Thomas's wealth and manipulation, did it feel like he was the one who had lost control of the situation? As the ceremony continued, there was a tension in the air. It wasn't just the strange mix of wealth and humility colliding. It was the unsettling feeling that perhaps Thomas had miscalculated. He thought he was in charge, that this was his game to win. But with every passing moment, Emily's presence seemed to challenge his every move. The vows were exchanged, but as they did, the shock on Thomas's face was unmistakable. Emily's words, her intentions, her quiet strength, it all seemed to carry more weight than anything he had ever planned. His whole life, filled with expensive suits, powerful connections, and luxurious cars, suddenly felt empty, meaningless. Emily had done something he never expected. She had changed the game completely. As the ceremony concluded and the guests began to disperse, whispers filled the air. Was Thomas the one who had been hurt here? Had he underestimated Emily, the maid he had thought was nothing more than a pawn? What had started as a cruel plan to destroy his ex-wife's pride was now spinning out of his control, and Thomas could feel the consequences beginning to unfold. But the real shock was yet to come. It wasn't just about Emily's strength or her defiance against Thomas's manipulative game. There was more to her story, more to the woman who had become his unexpected bride. As the world would soon learn, Emily was no ordinary maid. She had a past of her own, one that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. Thomas had set out to ruin his ex-wife's life, but in the end, it was his own life that would be forever altered. What had seemed like a simple revenge plot had just opened the door to a whole new world of secrets, surprises, and unexpected twists. But the real question remained, what did Emily truly want? What was her game? And how would Olivia, Thomas's ex-wife, react to the shocking turn of events? The world was waiting for the answer, and no one knew how this story would end. Stay tuned, because what happens next will leave you breathless. The days passed after the wedding. The shockwaves from Thomas and Emily's unexpected marriage continued to ripple through their world. The media couldn't get enough of the story. They speculated endlessly, spinning theories about why a billionaire like Thomas would marry a maid and why Emily had agreed to it. Was it love? Was it power? Or was there something deeper, something darker at play? The rumors were endless, but none of them came close to the truth. Thomas, for all his wealth and success, had always been a man driven by ego. He was a self-made billionaire, but that success didn't come without its toll. His marriage to Olivia had been the centerpiece of his life, and when it ended, it shattered him in ways he had never expected. Olivia had been more than just his wife. She had been his partner in the grand spectacle of his life. Together, they were untouchable, the golden couple everyone envied. But when she left him, taking half of everything he had built, it felt like his empire had crumbled. For years, Thomas had thrown himself into work, into his businesses, trying to bury the pain of the divorce under new investments, bigger projects, and endless luxury. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the thought of Olivia moving on, of her finding happiness without him. He knew she had remarried. She had built a life with someone else, someone who, in Thomas's eyes, could never measure up to the life they had shared. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the fact that she had moved on, leaving him behind in a way that he just couldn't accept. And so, when the idea struck him, when he thought of using Emily as a weapon to strike back at Olivia, it had felt like the perfect plan. A maid, a woman of no consequence in his eyes. The irony of it all, the power dynamic that would come into play, was delicious. Thomas believed that Olivia, with all her wealth and status, would be appalled. He imagined her, sitting in her luxurious home, seething with rage as the world turned its eyes to his new, unexpected marriage. He thought it would be the ultimate payback. He thought it would put her in her place. But what Thomas hadn't counted on was Emily's quiet strength, the way she refused to be just a piece in his game. From the moment they had met, he had underestimated her. She wasn't like the women he was used to, the ones who fawned over him, seeking his approval, or the ones who played along with his manipulations. Emily was different. She wasn't intimidated by his wealth or his status. She didn't need his money, and she certainly didn't need to be a part of his world. She had agreed to marry him, but not for the reasons he thought. She wasn't seeking revenge or any kind of payback. Emily had her own reasons that went far deeper than Thomas's shallow motives. Emily had grown up in a small town, working her way through life with little more than her own determination to keep her head above water. Her family had struggled, but they had always taught her the value of independence. She had always been the quiet one, the one who kept her head down, focused on doing what was necessary to survive. Becoming a maid in one of Thomas's estates was just another job, another way to keep the bills paid and food on the table. She had no idea that meeting Thomas would lead to a marriage. That would change everything. What most people didn't know was that Emily had a secret. She had once been involved in a relationship that ended horribly, leaving her scarred in ways that ran deeper than anyone could see. She had been betrayed by someone she trusted, someone she thought loved her. It had made her wary of people with power, of men like Thomas, who used their wealth and status to control others. She had agreed to marry him not because she wanted to be part of his world, but because she had plans of her own. She knew she could handle him in a way that would leave him reeling, questioning everything he thought he knew. But as Emily played her part, as she slowly revealed her strength, Thomas began to realize he had made a critical mistake. His carefully constructed world of luxury and control was beginning to crumble. Emily wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't impressed by his money or his power, and that was something Thomas had never encountered before. He had never met a woman who didn't need him. It rattled him, and for the first time in years, he began to feel vulnerable. Meanwhile, Olivia was watching from the shadows, trying to understand what was happening. She had known Thomas for years. She had loved him once, or so she thought, but now, seeing him entangled in a marriage with Emily, she couldn't help but feel a mix of curiosity and concern. She had moved on with her life, married someone who treated her well, someone who respected her. But there was a part of her that couldn't look away from the drama unfolding in front of her. Olivia wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't even surprised, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She knew Thomas too well. He wasn't the kind of man who did things without a reason. And the more she watched him with Emily, the more she realized that he was no longer the man she had married. This version of him, this man who was trying to control everything around him, seemed lost, desperate even. But Emily wasn't the only one who had secrets. Olivia did too. She had kept a part of herself hidden from Thomas, a part that she had never revealed. And now, with Emily in the picture, it seemed that the past might come back to haunt them all. Olivia was about to uncover a truth that would change everything, and she wasn't the only one. Emily, with her quiet strength and hidden past, had a story of her own that was far more complicated than anyone could have guessed. As the tension between Thomas, Olivia, and Emily built, the question loomed: would Thomas finally realize that he had been played, or would Emily's secrets tear everything apart before anyone could understand the full extent of the game they were all part of? One thing was certain: the web of lies, power, and revenge was about to snap, and no one was ready for what would happen next. As the days passed, the situation only grew more tense. Thomas, despite his best efforts, could no longer control the narrative. Emily was not just a pawn in his plan. She was playing him in ways he couldn't even comprehend. The cracks in his carefully constructed empire of control were widening, and he was too arrogant to see it at first. But as he watched Emily move with quiet grace, never reacting the way he expected, he began to question himself. There was a force in her that he had never anticipated, a strength he couldn't manipulate, and that terrified him more than anything. But it wasn't just Thomas, who was about to have their world flipped upside down. Olivia, who had been keeping her distance, watching from the sidelines, was about to uncover a secret that would change everything. She had always assumed that Thomas was simply trying to hurt her, that his marriage to Emily was just another in a long line of childish power plays. But as she dug deeper, Olivia uncovered something far more unsettling. Emily's past wasn't just tragic. It was tied to Thomas in a way she hadn't expected. Months before Emily had been hired as a maid in one of Thomas's estates, she had been connected to his business dealings in a completely different way. Olivia uncovered a letter buried in the back of an old drawer in one of Thomas's offices, revealing that Emily's family had once been part of a company that Thomas had bankrupted. Emily's father had been a key figure in a business deal gone wrong, and Thomas had been the one to pull the rug out from under them. It had ruined Emily's family, forcing them into a life of hardship and eventually leading Emily to become a maid just to survive. This was no coincidence. Emily wasn't just a victim of Thomas's plan. She was a woman on a mission of her own. The realization hit Olivia like a ton of bricks. Emily's marriage to Thomas wasn't about revenge on her. It was a deeper, more personal revenge against the man who had destroyed her family. Emily had agreed to marry Thomas to finally make him pay, to tear down everything he had built, and to expose the truth. The power dynamic that Thomas had imagined, where he controlled everything, was being reversed, and it was happening right in front of him. The night of the family gala was the breaking point, the most important event of the year, where the who's who of the elite gathered to celebrate Thomas's empire was fast approaching. Everyone was watching, waiting to see how the newly married couple would present themselves. Thomas was used to being the star of every show, but this time it wasn't going to go according to his plans. As the night unfolded, Emily stood by his side with a quiet resolve that unnerved him. She wasn't the meek maid he had imagined. She was calm, confident, and carrying a secret that Thomas could feel, but couldn't see. The moment arrived when Emily stood up to speak, surprising everyone in the room. She wasn't supposed to be the center of attention, but as she took the microphone, her voice was steady, and the room fell into a hushed silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Emily began, her eyes meeting Thomas's with a look that seemed to pierce through him. "I am honored to be here tonight, in front of you all, to speak the truth that many have long forgotten." The audience shifted uncomfortably as they sensed something was coming. Thomas tried to move, but his body was frozen in place. He had no idea what Emily was about to say, but he felt the weight of the moment crash down on him. "I know many of you are wondering why a woman like me would marry a man like him," Emily continued, her gaze still locked on Thomas. "And while my reasons may not be clear to all of you, I'm here to set the record straight." She paused for a moment, letting the tension build, then dropped the bombshell that no one saw coming. "My family was destroyed by Thomas Devereaux years ago," Emily said, her voice rising. "And today, I'm here to make sure that the truth is known. The deal that Thomas used to tear my father's company apart wasn't just a business decision, it was personal, and I will make sure that the world knows who he really is." A shocked gasp filled the room. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no going back. Emily's words shattered the image Thomas had worked so hard to create. His carefully maintained facade of success and power now looked fragile and hollow. People who had once admired him began to whisper, their opinions shifting in the wake of Emily's revelation. Thomas stood motionless, his mind racing. For the first time in years, he was out of control. His wealth, his influence. It all seemed irrelevant now. The truth had emerged, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Emily's revenge wasn't just about hurting him. It was about reclaiming her family's dignity, about taking back what had been stolen from them. And as the truth spread like wildfire, Thomas's world began to crumble. Olivia watched from the sidelines, her heart heavy with the realization that Emily had done something she never could. She had faced the past, taken control of the narrative, and turned the tables on Thomas in a way that no one, not even Thomas himself, had ever imagined. Olivia's own role in the story seemed almost insignificant now. She wasn't the central figure in this drama anymore. Emily was. As the evening unfolded, Thomas was left alone in the spotlight, exposed for who he truly was. His empire of wealth and influence no longer felt like an accomplishment. Instead, it felt like a prison, a trap he had built for himself. Emily had taken back the power that he had stolen from her family, and she had done it with grace, strength, and dignity. The fallout from that night was inevitable. Thomas's reputation, once untouchable, began to dissolve. Business deals were pulled, connections severed, and the world watched as the once mighty billionaire became a symbol of arrogance and greed. But it wasn't just the fall from grace that people remembered. It was the strength of the woman who had brought him down. Emily had taken her life back, and in doing so, she had rewritten the story that had been forced upon her. As the dust settled, the truth had been exposed, and the revenge was complete. Thomas had been defeated, not by Olivia, not by anyone else, but by the woman he had underestimated all along. And as Emily walked away from it all, she knew one thing for sure. Sometimes, the most powerful way to fight back isn't with anger or violence. It's with the truth, and in the end, that truth had set her free.